Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tin Man Thursday, where I'll be reading The Marvelous Wizard of Oz, The Marvelous Land of Oz, brought to you by Junior Classic Books and Fairytales. In the meantime, I'm going to let people know I'm streaming, and I'll be right back. Alright, let's go ahead and get into the book. To the Marvelous Land of Oz. All his hearers seemed puzzled and unconvinced. Who's talking at this point? The wonderful wizard escaped in a balloon, he continued. We don't know how to make a balloon, of course, but any sort of thing that can fly through the air can carry us easily. So I suggest that my friend, the Tin Woodsman, who is a skillful mechanic, shall build some sort of a machine with good enough wings to carry us, and our friend Tip can then bring the thing to life with his magical powder. Bravo, cried Nick Chopper. What splendid brains, murmured Jack. Really, quite clever, said the educated Wogglebug. I believe it can be done, declared Chip. That is, if the Tin Woodsman is equal to making the thing. I'll do my best, said Nick cheerfully. And, as a matter of fact, I do not often fail in what I attempt, but the thing will have to be built on the roof of the Plot Palace, so it can rise comfortably into the air. To be sure, said the Scarecrow. Then let us search through the palace, continued the Tin Woodsman, and carry all the metal we can find to the roof, where I will begin my work. First, however, said the Pumpkinhead, I beg you will release me from this horse and make me another leg to walk with, for in my present condition I am of no use to myself or to anyone else. So the Tin Woodsman knocked a mahogany center table to pieces with his axe and fitted one of the legs, which was beautifully carved onto the body of Jack Pumpkinhead, who was very proud of the acquisition. It seems strange, said he, as he watched the Tin Woodsman work, that my left leg should be the most elegant and substantial part of me. That proves you are unusual, returned the Scarecrow. And I am convinced that the only people worthy of consideration in this world are the unusual ones, for the common folks are like the leaves of a tree, and live and die unnoticed. Spoken like a philosopher, cried the Wogglebug, as he assisted the Tin Woodsman to set Jack upon his feet. How do you feel now? Asked Tip, watching the Pumpkinhead stump around to try his new leg. As good as new, answered Jack joyfully, and quite ready to assist you all to escape. Then let us get to work, said the Scarecrow in a businesslike tone. So glad to be doing anything that might lead to the end of their captivity, the friends separated to wander over the palace, in search of fitting material to use in the construction of their aerial machine. The astonishing flight of the Gump. When the adventurers assembled upon the roof, it was found that a remarkably strange assortment of articles had been selected by the various members of the party. No one seemed to have a very clear idea of what was required, but all had brought something. The Wogglebug had taken from its position over the mantelpiece in the great hallway the head of a Gump, which was adorned with wide-spreading antlers, and this, with great care and greater difficulty, the insect had carried up the stairs to the roof. This Gump resembled an elk's head, only the nose turned upward in a saucy manner, and there were whiskers upon its chin, like those of a billy goat. Why the Wogglebug selected this article he could not have explained, except that it had aroused his curiosity. Tip, with the aid of the sawhorse, had brought a large upholstered sofa to the roof. It was an old-fashioned piece of furniture, with high back and ends. It was so heavy that even by resting the greatest weight upon the back of the sawhorse, the boy found himself out of breath when at last the clumsy sofa was dumped upon the roof. The Pumpkinhead had brought a broom, which was the first thing he saw. The Scarecrow arrived with a coil of clotheslines and ropes which he had taken from the courtyard, and in his trip up the stairs he had become so entangled in the loose ends of the ropes that both he and his burden tumbled in a heap upon the roof, and might have rolled off it. Tip had not rescued him. The Tin Woodsman appeared last. He also had been to the courtyard, where he had cut 4 great spreading leaves from a huge palm tree that was the pride of all the inhabitants of the Emerald City. "My dear Nick," exclaimed the Scarecrow, seeing what his friend had done, "you had been guilty of the greatest crime any person can commit in the Emerald City. If I remember rightly, the penalty for chopping leaves from the royal palm tree is to be killed 7 times, and afterwards imprisoned for life." "It cannot be helped now," answered the Tin Woodsman, throwing down the big leaves upon the roof. "But it may be one more reason why it is necessary for us to escape. And now let us see what you have found for me to work with." Many were the doubtful looks cast upon the heap of miscellaneous material that now shutted the roof, and finally the Scarecrow shook his head and remarked, "Well, if friend Nick can manufacture from this mess of rubbish a thing that will fly through the air and carry us to safety, then I will acknowledge him to be a better mechanic than I suspected." But the Tin Woodsman seemed at first by no means sure of his powers, and only after polishing his forehead vigorously with the Camosus leather did he resolve to undertake the task. "The first thing required for the machine," said he, "is a body big enough to carry the entire party. This sofa is the biggest thing we have, and might be used for a body. But should the machine ever tip sideways, we would all slide off and fall to the ground."
"Why not use 2 sofas?" asked Tip. "There's another one just like this downstairs."
"That is a very sensible suggestion," exclaimed the Tin Woodsman. "You must fetch the other sofa at once." So Tip and the Sawhorse managed with much labor to get the second sofa to the roof, and when the two were placed together, edge to edge, the backs and ends formed a protecting rampart all around the seats. "Excellent!" cried the Scarecrow. "We can ride within this smug, snug nest quite at our ease." The 2 sofas were now bound firmly together with ropes and clotheslines, and then Nick Chopper fastened the Gump's head to one end. "That will show which is the front end of the thing," said he, greatly pleased with the idea. "And really, if you examine it critically, the Gump looks very well as a figurehead. These great palm leaves, for which I have endangered my life 7 times, must serve us as wings."
"Are they strong enough?"
asked the boy. "They are as strong as anything we can get," answered the woodsman. "And although they are not in proportion to the thing's body, we are not in a position to be very particular." So he fastened the palm leaves to the sofas, 2 on each side, said the Wogglebug with a considerable admiration. "The thing is now complete, and only needs to be brought back to life." "Stop a moment," exclaimed Jack. "Are you not going to use my broom?" What for? Asked the Scarecrow. Why, it can be fastened to the back end for a tail, answered the Pumpkinhead. Surely you would not call the thing complete without a tail? Hmm, said the Tin Woodsman. I do not see the use of a tail. We are not trying to copy a beast, or a fish, or a bird. All we ask of the thing is to carry us through the air. Perhaps, after the thing is brought to life, it can use a tail to steer with, suggested the Scarecrow. For, for if it flies through the air, it will not be unlike a bird, and I've noticed that all birds have tails, which they use for a rudder while flying. Very well, answered Nick. The broom shall be used for a tail. And he fastened it firmly to the back end of the sofa body. Tip took the pepper box from his pocket. The thing looks very big, said he anxiously, and I am not sure there is enough powder left to bring all of it to life, but I'll make it go as far as possible. Put most of the on the wings, said Nick Chopper, for they must be made as strong as possible. And don't forget the head, exclaimed the Wogglebug. Or the tail, added Jack Pumpkinhead. Do be quiet, said Tip nervously. You must give me a chance to work the magic charm in the proper manner. Very carefully he began sprinkling the thing with the precious powder. Each of the four wings was first lightly covered with a layer. Then the sofas were sprinkled and the broom given a slight coating. The head! Don't, I beg of you, forget the head, cried the Wogglebug excitedly. There's only a little bit of the powder left, announced Tip, looking within the box. And it seems to me it is more important to bring the legs of the sofa to life than the head. Not so, decided the Scarecrow. Everything must have a head to direct it, and since this creature is to fly and not walk, it is really unimportant whether its legs are alive or not. So Tip abided by this decision and sprinkled the Gump's head with the remainder of the powder. Now, said he, keep silence while I work the charm. Having heard old Mombi pronounce the magic words, and having also succeeded in bringing the sawhorse to life, Tip did not hesitate an instant in speaking the three Kabbalistic words, each accompanied by the peculiar gesture of the hands. It was a grave and impressive ceremony. As he finished the incantation, the thing shuddered through its huge bulk. The Gump gave the screeching cry that is familiar to those animals, and then the four wings began flopping furiously. Tip managed to grasp a chimney, else he would have been blown off the roof by the terrible breeze raised by the wings. The Scarecrow, being light in weight, was caught up bodily and borne through the air, until Tip luckily seized him by one leg and held him fast. The Wogglebug lay flat upon the roof and so escaped harm, and the Tin Woodsman, whose weight of tin anchored him firmly, threw both arms around Jack Pumpkinhead and managed to save him. The sawhorse toppled over upon his back and lay with his legs waving helplessly above him. And now, while all were struggling to recover themselves, the thing rose slowly from the air and mounted into the air. Slowly from the roof and mounted into the air. Here, come back, cried Tip in a frightened voice, as he clung to the chimney with one hand and the Scarecrow with the other. Come back at once, I command you. It was now that the wisdom of the Scarecrow in bringing the head of the thing to life instead of the legs was proved beyond a doubt. For the Gump, already high in the air, turned its head at Tip's command, and gradually circled around until it could view the roof of the palace. Come back, shouted the boy again, and the Gump obeyed slowly and gracefully waving its four wings in the air till the thing had settled once more upon the roof and become still. In the jackdaw's nest. This, said the Gump in a squeaky voice, not at all proportioned to the size of its great body,
is the most novel experience I ever heard of. The last thing I remember distinctly is walking through the forest and hearing a loud noise. Something probably killed me then, and it certainly ought to have been the end of me. Yet here I am, alive again, with four monstrous wings and a body which I venture to say would make any respectable animal or fowl weep with shame to own. What does it all mean? Am I a Gump, or am I a Juggernaut?
The creature, as it spoke, wiggled its chin whiskers in a very comical manner.
You're just a thing,
answered Tip,
with a Gump's head on it, and we have made you and brought you to life so that you can carry us through the air wherever we wish to go. Very good,
said the thing.
As I am not a Gump, I cannot have a Gump's pride or independent spirit, so I may as well become your servant. As anything else, my only satisfaction is that I do not seem to have a very strong constitution, and am not likely to live long in a state of slavery.
Don't say that, I beg of you, cried the Tin Woodsman, whose excellent heart was strongly affected by this sad speech. Are you not feeling well today?
Oh, as for that,
returned the Gump,
it is my first day of existence, so I cannot judge whether I am feeling well or ill.
And it waved its broom tail to and fro in a pensive manner. Come, come, said the Scarecrow kindly. Do try to be more cheerful and take life as you find it. We shall be kind masters and will strive to render your existence as pleasant as possible. Are you willing to carry us through the air wherever we wish to go?
Certainly,
answered the Gump.
I greatly prefer the navigate the air, for should I travel on the earth and meet with one of my own species, my embarrassment would be something awful.
I can appreciate that, said the Tin Woodsman sympathetically.
And yet,
continued the thing,
when I carefully look you over, my masters, none of you seem to be constructed much more artistically than I am.
Appearances can be deceiving, said the Wogglebug earnestly. I am both highly magnified and thoroughly educated.
Indeed,
murmured the Gump indifferently. And my brains are considered remarkably rare specimens. And my brains are considered remarkably rare specimens, added the Scarecrow proudly.
How strange,
remarked the Gump. Although I am of tin, said the Woodsman, I own a heart altogether, the warmest and most admirable in the whole world.
I'm delighted to hear it,
replied the Gump with a slight cough. My smile, said Jack Pumpkinhead, is worthy of your best attention, and it is always the same. Semper idem, exclaimed the Wogglebug pompously, and the Gump turned to stare at it. And I, declared the Sawhorse, filling in an awkward pause, am only remarkable because I can't help it.
I am proud indeed to meet with such exceptional masters,
said the Gump in a careless tone.
If I could but secure so complete an introduction to myself, I would be more than satisfied.
That will come in time, remarked the Scarecrow. To know thyself is considered quite an accomplishment, which it has taken us, who are your elders, months to perfect. But now, he added, turning to the others, Let us get aboard and start upon our journey.
Where shall we go?
Asked Tip as he clambered to a seat on the sofa and assisted the Pumpkinhead to follow him. In the South Country rules a very delightful queen called Glinda the Good, who I am sure will gladly receive us, said the Scarecrow, getting into the thing clumsily. Let us go to see. Let us go to her and ask her advice. That is cleverly thought of, declared Nick Chopper, giving the Wogglebug a boost and then toppling the Sawhorse into the rear end of the cushioned seats. I know Glinda the Good, and believe she will prove a friend indeed.
Are we all ready?
Asked the boy. Yes, answered the Tin Woodsman, seating himself beside the Scarecrow. Then, said Tip, addressing the Gump,
be kind enough to fly us to the southward, and do not go higher than to escape the houses and trees, for it makes me dizzy to be up so far. All right,
answered the Gump briefly. It flapped its 4 huge wings and rose slowly into the air. And then, while our little band of adventurers clung to the backs and sides of the sofas for support, the Gump turned toward the south and soared swiftly and majestically away. The scenic effect from the altitude is marvelous, commented the educated Wogglebug as they rode along. Never mind the scenery, said the Scarecrow. Hold on tight, or you may get a tumble. The thing seems to rock badly.
It will be dark soon,
said Tip, observing the sun was low on the horizon.
Perhaps we should have waited until morning. I wonder if the Gump can fly in the night. I've been wondering that myself,
returned the Gump quietly.
You see, this is a new experience to me. I used to have legs that carried me swiftly over the ground, but now my legs feel as if they were asleep.
They are, said Tip.
We didn't bring them to life.
You're expected to fly. You're expected to fly, exclaimed the Scarecrow. Not to walk. We can walk ourselves, said the Wogglebug.
I begin to understand what is required of me,
remarked the Gump.
So I will do my best to please you.
And it flew on for a time in silence. Presently, Jack Pumpkinhead became uneasy. I wonder if riding through the air is liable to spoil pumpkins, he said. Not unless you carelessly drop your head over the side, answered the Wogglebug. In that event, your head would no longer be a pumpkin, but would become a squash.
Have I not asked you to restrain those unfeeling jokes?
Demanded Tip, looking at the Wogglebug with a severe expression.
You have, and I've restrained a good many of them, replied the insect. But there are opportunities for so many excellent puns in our language that to an educated person like myself, the temptation to express them is almost irresistible. People with more or less education discovered those puns centuries ago, said Tip.
Are you sure? Asked the Wogglebug with a startled look.
Of course I am,
answered the boy.
An educated Wogglebug may be a new thing, but a Wogglebug education is as old as the hills, judging from the display you make of it.
The insect seemed much impressed by this remark, and for a time maintained a meek silence. The Scarecrow, in shifting his seat, saw upon the cushions the pepper box which Tip had cast aside and began to examine it.
Throw it overboard, said the boy. It's quite empty now, and there's no use keeping it.
Is it really empty? Asked the Scarecrow, looking curiously into the box.
Of course it is,
answered Tip.
I shook out every grain of the powder,
and the box has 2 buttons, announced the Scarecrow. For the bottom of the inside is fully an inch away from the bottom of the outside. Let me see, said the Tin Woodsman, taking the box from his friend. Yes, he declared, after looking it over. The thing certainly has a false bottom. Now, I wonder what it is for. That is for.
Can't you get it apart and find out?
Inquired Tip, now quite interested in the mystery. Why, yes, the lower butt unscrews, said the Tin Woodsman. My fingers are rather stiff. Please see if you can open it. He handed the pepper box to Tip, who had no difficulty in unscrewing the bottom, and in the cavity below were three silver pills, with a carefully folded paper lying underneath them. This paper the boy proceeded to unfold, taking care not to spill the pills, and found several lines clearly written in red ink.
Read it aloud.
Read it aloud, said the Scarecrow. So Tip reads as follows.
Dr. Nick E. Dick's famous wishing pills. The Tin
Woodsman was usually a peaceful man, but when occasion required, he could fight as fiercely as a Roman gladiator. So when the jackdaws neatly knocked him down, in the rush of wings, and their sharp beaks and claws threatened to damage his brilliant plating, the woodman picked up his axe and made it whirl swiftly around his head. But although many were beaten off in this way, the birds were so numerous and so brave that they continued the attack as furiously as before. Some of them pecked at the eyes of the gump, which hung over the nest in a helpless condition. But the gump's eyes were of glass and could not be inquired. Others of the jackdaws rushed at the sawhorse, but that animal, being still upon his back, kicked out so viciously that his wooden legs that he beat off as many assailants as did the woodman's axe. Finding themselves thus opposed, the birds fell upon the Scarecrow's straw, which lay at the center of the nest, covering Tip and the Wogglebug and Jack's pumpkin head, and began tearing it away and flying off with it, only to let it drop, straw by straw, into the great gulf beneath. The Scarecrow's head, noting with dismay this wanton destruction of his interior, cried to the Tin Woodsman to save him, and that good friend responded with renewed energy. His axe fairly flashed among the jackdaws, and fortunately the gump began wildly waving, the two wings remaining on the left side of its body. The flutter of these great wings filled the jackdaws with terror, and when the gump, by its exertions, freed itself from the peg of rock on which it hung, and sank flopping into the nest, the alarm of the birds knew no bounds, and they fled screaming over the mountains. When the last foe had disappeared, Tip crawled from under the sofas and assisted the Wogglebug to follow him.
We are saved,
shouted the boy delightedly. We are indeed, responded the educated insect, fairly hugging the stiff head of the gump in his joy.
And we owe it all to the flopping of the thing,
and the good axe of the woodsman's.
If I am saved, get me out of here,
called. If I am saved, then get me out of here, called Jack, whose head was still beneath the sofas, and Tip managed to roll the pumpkin out and place it upon its neck again. He also set the sawhorse upright and said to it,
We owe you many thanks for the gallant fight you made.
I really think we have escaped very nicely, remarked the Tin Woodsman in a tone of pride. Not so, exclaimed a hollow voice. At this they all turned in surprise to look at the Scarecrow's head, which lay at the back of the nest. I am completely ruined, declared the Scarecrow as he noted their astonishment. For where is the straw that stuffs my body? The awful question startled them all. They gazed around the nest with horror, for not a vestige of straw remained. The jackdaws had stolen it to the last wisp and flung it all into the chasm they yawned for hundreds of feet beneath the nest. My poor, poor friend, said the Tin Woodsman, taking up the Scarecrow's head and caressing it tenderly. Whoever could imagine it would come to this untimely end? I did it to save my friends, returned the head, and I am glad that I perished in so noble and unselfish a manner. But why are you all so despondent? Inquired the Wogglebug. Scarecrow's clothing is still safe. Yes. Yes, answered the Tin Woodsman. But our friend's clothes are useless without stuffing. Why not stuff him with money? Asked Tip. Money? They all cried in an amazed chorus. To be sure, said the boy. In the bottom of the nest are thousands of dollar bills, and $2 bills, and $5 bills, and tens, and 20s, and 50s. There are enough of them to stuff a dozen scarecrows. Why not use the money? The Tin Woodsman began to turn over the rubbish with the handle of his axe, and sure enough, when they had first thought only worthless papers, were found to be all bills and various denominations, which the mischievous jackdaws had for years been engaged in stealing from the villages and cities they visited. There was an immense fortune lying in that inaccessible nest, and Tip's suggestion was, with the Scarecrow's consent, quickly acted upon. They selected all the newest and cleanest bills, and assorted them into various piles. The Scarecrow's left leg and boot were stuffed with $5 bills. His right leg was stuffed with $10 bills, and his body so closely filled with 50s, 100s, and 1000s that he could scarcely button his jacket with comfort. You are now, said the Wogglebug impressively, when the task had been completed, the most valuable member of our party, and you are among faithful friends. There is little danger of your being spent. Thank you, returned the Scarecrow gratefully. I feel like a new man, and although at first glance I might be mistaken for a safety deposit vault, I beg you to remember that my brains are still composed of the same old material, and these are the possessions that have always made me a person to be depended upon in an emergency. Well, the emergency is here, observed Tip, and unless your brains help us out of it, we shall be compelled to pass the remainder of our lives in this nest. How about these wishing pills? Inquired the Scarecrow, taking the box from his jacket pocket. Can't we use them to escape? Not unless we can count 17 by twos, answered the Tin Woodsman. But our friend, the Wogglebug, claims to be highly educated, so he ought easily to figure out how that can be done. It isn't a question of education, required the insect. It's merely a question of mathematics. I've seen the professor work lots of sums on the blackboard, and he claimed anything could be done with X's and Y's and A's, and such things are mixing them up, with plenty of pluses and minuses, and equals, and so forth. But he never said anything, so far as I can remember, about counting up to the odd numbers of 17s, by the even numbers of 2s. Stop! Stop! Cried the Pumpkinhead. You're making my head ache. And mine, added the Scarecrow. Your mathematics seem to me very like a bottle of mixed pickles. The more you fish for what you want, the less you have of getting it. I am certain that if the thing can be accomplished at all, it is in a very simple manner. Yes, said Tip. Old Mommy couldn't use X's and minuses, for she never went to school. Why not start counting at a half of one? Asked the Sawhorse abruptly. Then anyone can count up to 17 by twos very easily. They looked at each other in purpose, for the Sawhorse was considered the most stupid of the entire party. You make me quite ashamed of myself, said the Scarecrow, bowing low of the Sawhorse. Nevertheless, the creature is right, declared the Wogbug, for twice 1/2 is 1. And if you get to 1, it is easy to count from 1 up to 17s by twos. I wonder I didn't think of that myself, said the Pumpkinhead. I don't, returned the Scarecrow. You're no wiser than the rest of us, are you? But let us make a wish at once. Who will swallow the first pill? Suppose you could do it, suggested Tip. I can't, said the Scarecrow. Why not? You've a mouth, haven't you? Asked the boy. Yes, but my mouth is painted on, and there's no swallow connected with it, answered the Scarecrow. In fact, he continued, looking from one to another critically, I believe the boy and the Wogglebug are the only ones in our party that are able to swallow. Observing the truth of this remark, Tip said, Then I will undertake to make the first wish. Give me one of those silver pills. Then the Scarecrow tried to do, but his padded gloves were too clumsy to clutch so small an object, and he held the box towards the boy, while Tip selected one of the pills and swallowed it. Count, cried the Scarecrow. 1/2, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, counted Tip. 13, 15, 17. Oh, wish, said the Tin Woodsman anxiously. But just then the boy began to suffer such fearful pains that he became alarmed. The pill has poisoned me, he gasped. Oh, uh, 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 ouch, murder, fire, oh. And here he rolled upon the bottom of the nest in such contortions that he frightened them all. What can we do for you? Speak, I beg, answered the Tin Woodsman, tears of sympathy running down his nickeled cheeks. I don't know, answered Tip. I wish I'd never swallowed that pill. Then at once the pain stopped, and the boy rose to his feet again, and found the Scarecrow looking with amazement at the end of the pepper box. What's happened? Asked the boy, a little ashamed of his recent exhibition. Why, the 3 pills are in the box again. Why, the 3 pills are in the box again, said the Scarecrow. Of course they are, the Wogglebug declared. Didn't Tip wish that he'd never swallowed one of them? Well, the wish came true, and he didn't swallow one of them, so of course they are all 3 in the box. That may be, but the pill gave me a dreadful pain just the same, said the boy. Impossible, declared the Wogglebug. If you have never swallowed it, the pill cannot have given you a pain, and as your wish, being granted, proves you did not swallow the pill. It is also plain that you suffered no pain. And it was splendid imitations of a pain, responded Tip. angrily.
Suppose you try the next pill yourself. We're wasted one with wish already.
Oh no, we haven't, protested the Scarecrow. Here are still 3 pills in the box, with each pill is good for a wish.
Now you're making my head ache,
Said Tip.
I can't understand the thing at all, but I won't take another pill, I promise you.
And with this remark, he retired sulkily to the back of the nest. Well, said the Wogglebug, it remains for me to save us in my most high by magnified and thoroughly educated manner, for I seem to be the only one able and willing to make a wish. Let me have one of those pills. He swallowed it without hesitation, and they all stood admiring his courage, while the insect counted 17 by twos in the same way that Tip had done, and for some reason, perhaps because Wogglebugs have stronger stomachs than boys, the silver pellet caused it no pain whatever. I wish the Gump's broken wings mended, and as good as new, said the Wogglebug in a slow, impressive voice. All turned to look at the thing, and so quickly had the wish been granted that the Gump lay before them in a perfect repair, and as well able to fly through the air as when it had first been brought to life on the roof of the palace. The Scarecrow appeals to Glinda the Good. Hooray! Shouted the Scarecrow, gaily. We can now leave this miserable jackdaw's nest whenever we please. But it is nearly dark, said the Tin Woodsman, and unless we wait until morning to make our flight, we may get into more trouble. I don't like these night trips, for one never knows what will happen. So it was decided to wait until daylight, and the adventurers amused themselves in the twilight by searching the jackdaw's nest for treasures. The Wogglebug found 2 handsome bracelets of wrought gold, which fitted his slender arms very well. The Scarecrow took a fancy for rings, of which there were many in the nest. Before long he had fitted a ring to each finger of his padded gloves, and not being content with that display, he added one more to each thumb. As he carefully chose those rings, set with sparkling stones such as rubies, amethysts, and sapphires. The Scarecrow's hands now presented a most brilliant appearance. This nest would be a picnic for Queen Ginger, said he musingly, or as nearly as I can make out that she and her girls conquered me merely to rob my city of its emeralds. The Tin Woodsman was content with his diamond necklace and refused to accept any additional decorations. But Tip secured a fine gold watch, which was attached to a heavy fob, and placed it in his pocket. With much pride, he also pinned several jeweled brooches to Jack Pumpkinhead's red waistcoat, and attached a lorgnette by means of a fine chain to the neck of the sawhorse. It's very pretty, said the creature, regarding the lorgnette approvingly. But what's it for? None of them could answer the question, however, so the sawhorse decided it was some rare decoration, and became very fond of it. That none of the party might be slighted, they ended by placing several large seal rings upon the points of the Gump's antlers. Although that odd personage seemed by no means gratified by the attention, darkness soon fell upon them, and Tip and the Wogglebug went to sleep, while the others sat down to wait patiently for the day. Next morning they had cause to congratulate themselves upon the useful condition of the Gump, for with daylight a great flock of jackdaws approached to engage in one more battle for the possession of the nest. But our adventurers did not wait for the assault. They tumbled into the cushioned seats of the sofa as quickly as possible. Tip gave word to the Gump to start. At once it rose into the air, the great wings flopping strongly and with regular motions. And in a few moments they were so far from the nest that the chattering jackdaws took possession without any attempt at pursuit. The thing flew due north, going in the same direction from whence it had come. At least, that was the Scarecrow's opinion, and the others agreed that the Scarecrow was the best judge of direction. After passing over several cities and villages, the Gump carried them high above a broad plain where houses became more and more scattered until they disappeared altogether. Next came the wide sandy desert separating the rest of the world from the land of Oz, and before noon they saw the dome-shaped houses that proved they were once more within the borders of their native land. But the houses and fences are blue, said the Tin Woodsman, and that indicates we are in the land of the Munchkins, and therefore the long distance will do the good.
What shall we do?
Asked the boy, turning to their guide.
I don't know,
replied the Scarecrow frankly. If we were at the Emerald City, we could then move directly southward and so reach our destination, but we dare not go to the Emerald City, and the Gump is probably carrying us further in the wrong direction with every flap of its wings. Then the Wogglebug must swallow another pill, said Tip decidedly, and wish us headed in the right direction. Very well, returned the highly magnified one. I'm willing. But when the Scarecrow searched in his pocket for the pepper box containing the 2 silver wishing pills, it was not to be found. Filled with anxiety, the voyagers hunted throughout every inch of the thing for the precious box, but it had disappeared entirely. And still the Gump flew onward, carrying them they knew not where. I must have left the pepper box in the jackdaw's nest, said the Scarecrow at length. It is a great misfortune, the Tin Woodsman declared. But we are no worse off than before we discovered the wishing pills. We are better off, replied Tip, for the one pill we used has enabled us to escape from that horrid nest. Yet the loss of those other 2 is serious, and I deserve a good scolding for my carelessness. The Scarecrow rejoined penitently. For in such an unusual party as this, accidents are liable to happen any moment, and even now we may be approaching a new danger. No one dared contradict this, and a dismal silence ensued. The Gump flew steadily on. Suddenly Tip uttered an exclamation of surprise. We must have reached the South Country, he cried, for below us everything is red. Immediately they all leaned over the backs of the sofas to look, all except Jack, who was too careful of his pumpkin head to risk it slipping off his neck. Sure enough, the red houses and fences and trees indicated they were within the domain of Glinda the Good, and presently, as they glided rapidly on, the Tin Woodsman recognized the roads and buildings. They passed and altered slightly the flight of the Gump, so that they might reach the palace of the celebrated sorceress. Good, cried the Scarecrow, delightedly. We do not need the lost wishing pill now, for we have arrived at our destination. Gradually the thing sank lower and nearer to the ground, until at length it came to rest within the beautiful gardens of Glinda. Settling upon velvety green lawn close by a fountain which sent sprays of flashing gems instead of water high into the air, whence they fell with a soft tinkling sound into the carved marble basin placed to receive them. Everything was very gorgeous in Glinda's gardens, and while our voyagers gazed about with admiring eyes, a company of soldiers silently appeared and surrounded them. But these soldiers, the great sorceress, were entirely different from those of Ginger's army of revolt. Although they were likewise girls, for Glinda's soldiers wore neat uniforms and bore swords and spears, and they marched with a skill and precision that proved them well trained in the arts of war. The captain commanding this troop, which was Glinda's private bodyguard, recognized the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodsman at once, and greeted them with respectful salutations. "Good day," said the Scarecrow gallantly, removing his hat while the woodman gave a soldier salute. "We have come to request an audience with your fair ruler. Glinda is now within her palace. Glinda is now within her palace, awaiting you," returned the captain, "for she saw you coming long before you arrived." "That is strange," said Tin, wondering. "Now, not at all," answered the Scarecrow. "Not at all. The, for Glinda the Good is a mighty sorceress, and nothing that goes on in the land of Oz escapes her notice. I suppose she knows why we came as well as we do ourselves." "Then what was the use of our coming?" asked Jack stupidly. "Then what was the use of our coming?" asked Jack stupidly. "To prove you were a Pumpkinhead," retorted the Scarecrow. "But if the sorceress expects us to, we must not keep her waiting." So they all clambered out of the sofas and followed the captain towards the palace. Even the Sawhorse taking his palace in the precision upon her throne of one moment, need to clean the glasses. Finely wrought gold sat Glinda, and she could scarcely repress a smile as her peculiar visitors entered and bowed before her. Both the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodsman she knew and liked, but the awkward Pumpkinhead and highly magnified Wogglebug were creatures she had never before seen, and they carried even more curious than the others. As for the Sawhorse, he looked to be nothing more than an animated chunk of wood, and he bowed so stiffly that his head bumped against its hoof against the floor, causing a ripple of laughter among the soldiers, in which Glinda frankly joined. "I beg to announce to your glorious highness," began the Scarecrow in a solemn voice, "that my Emerald City has been overrun by a crowd of impudent girls with knitting needles, who have enslaved all the men, robbed the streets and public buildings of all their emerald jewels, and usurped my throne." "I know it," said Glinda. "They also threatened to destroy me, as well as all the good friends and allies you see before you." "They also threatened to destroy me, as well as all the good friends and allies you see before you," continued the Scarecrow. "And had we not managed to escape their clutches, our days would long since have ended." "I know it," repeated Glinda. "Therefore I have come to beg your assistance," resumed the Scarecrow. "For I believe you are always glad to succor the unfortunate and oppressed." "That is true," replied the sorceress slowly. "But the Emerald City is now ruled by General Ginger, who has caused herself to be proclaimed queen. What right have I to oppose her? Why, she stole the throne from me, said the Scarecrow. And how come you to possess the throne? Asked Glinda. I got it from the Wizard of Oz, and by the choice of the people, returned the Scarecrow, uneasy at such questioning. And where did the wizard get it? She continued gravely. I am told he took it from Pastoria, the former king, said the Scarecrow, becoming confused through the intent look of the sorceress. Then, declared Glinda, the throne of the Emerald City belongs neither to you nor to Ginger, but to this Pastoria, from whom the wizard usurped it. That is true, acknowledged the Scarecrow humbly. But Pastoria is now dead and gone, and someone must rule in his place. Pastoria had a daughter who was the rightful heir of the throne of the Emerald City. Did you know that? Questioned the sorceress. No, replied the Scarecrow. But if the girl still lives, I will not stand in her way. It will satisfy me as well to have Ginger turned out as an impostor and to regain the throne myself. In fact, it isn't much fun to be king, especially if one has good brains. I have known for some time that I am fitted to occupy a far more exalted position. But where is the girl who owns the throne, and what is her name? Her name is Ozma, answered answered Glinda. But where she is, I have tried in vain to discover, for the Wizard of Oz, when he stole the throne from Ozma's father, hid the girl in some secret place, and by the means of a magical trick with which I am not familiar, he managed to prevent her being discovered, even by so experienced a sorceress as myself. That is strange, interrupted the Wogglebug promptly. I have been informed that the wonderful Wizard of Oz was. Take a break, and we'll be right back. Nothing more than a humbug. Nonsense, exclaimed the Scarecrow, much provoked by the speech. Didn't he give me a wonderful set of brains? There's no humbug about my heart, announced the Tin Woodman, glaring indignantly at the Wogglebug. Perhaps I was misinformed? Stammered the insect, shrinking back. I never knew the wizard personally. Well, we did, retorted the Scarecrow, and he was a very great wizard. I assure you, it is true he was guilty of some slight impostures, but unless he was a great wizard, how, let me ask, could he have hidden this girl Ozma so securely that no one can find her? I give it up, replied the Wogglebug meekly. That is the most sensible speech you've made, said the Tin Woodsman.
I must really make another effort to discover where this girl is hidden,
resumed the sorceress, thoughtfully.
I have in my library a book in which is inscribed every action of the wizard while he was in our land of Oz, or, at least, every action that could be observed by my spies. This book I will read carefully tonight, and try to single out the acts that may guide us in discovering the lost Ozma. In the meantime, pray amuse yourself in my palace, and command my servants as if they were your own. I will grant you another audience tomorrow.
With this gracious speech, Glinda dismissed the adventurers, and they wandered away through the beautiful gardens, where they passed several hours enjoying all the delightful things with which the Queen of the Southland had surrounded her royal palace. On the following morning, they again appeared before Glinda, who said to them,
I have searched carefully through the records of the wizard's actions, and among them I can find but three that appear to have been suspicious. He ate beans with a knife, made 3 secret visits to old Mombi, and lifted slightly on his left foot.
Ah, that last is certainly suspicious, exclaimed the Pumpkinhead. Not necessarily, said the Scarecrow. He may have had corns. Now it seems to me his eating beans with a knife is more suspicious. Perhaps, perhaps it is polite customs in Omaha, from which great country the wizard originally came, suggested the Tin Woodsman. It may be, admitted the Scarecrow.
But why,
Asked Glinda.
did he make 3 secret visits to old Mombi?
Ah, why indeed? Echoed the Wogglebug impressively.
We know that the wizard taught the old woman many of his tricks of magic,
Continued Glinda.
and this he would not have done had she not assisted him in some way, so we may suspect, with good reason, that Mombi aided him to aid the girl Ozma, who was the real heir to the throne of the Emerald City, and a constant danger to the usurper. For, if the people knew that she lived, they would quickly make her their queen, and restore her to her rightful position.
An able argument, cried the Scarecrow. I have no doubt that Mombi was mixed up in this wicked business, but how does that knowledge help us?
We must find Mombi
Replied Glinda.
and force her to tell where the girl is hidden. Mombi is now with Mombi is now with Queen Ginger in the Emerald City, said Tip. It was she who threw so many obstacles in our pathway to make Ginger threaten to destroy my friends and get me back into the old witch's power. Then
decided Glinda.
I will march with my army to the Emerald City and take Mombi prisoner. After that, we can perhaps force her to tell her truth about Ozma. She is a terrible old woman,
Remarked Tip with a shudder at the thought of Mombi's black kettle.
and obstinate too. I am quite obstinate myself,
Returned the sorceress with a sweet smile.
so I will not fear Mombi in the least. Today, I will make all necessary preparations, and we will march upon the Emerald City at daybreak tomorrow.
The Tin Woodsman plucks a rose. The army of Glinda the Good looked very grand and imposing when it assembled at daybreak. Before the palace gates, the uniforms of the girl soldiers were pretty and of colors, and their silver-tipped spears were bright and glistening, the long shafts being inlaid with mother-of-pearl. All the officers wore sharp, gleaming swords and shields edged with peacock feathers, and it really seemed that no foe could be any possibility defeat could by any possibility defeat such a brilliant army. The sorceress rode in a beautiful pelican, which was like the body of a coach, having doors and windows with silken curtains, but instead of wheels, which a coach has, the pelican rested upon two long horizontal bars, which were borne upon the shoulders of 12 servants. The Scarecrow and his comrades decided to ride in the Gump, in order to keep up with the swift march of the army. So, as soon as Glinda had started and her soldiers had marched away to the inspiring strains of music played by the royal band, our friends climbed into the sofas and followed. The Gump flew along slowly at a point directly over the pelican, in which rode the sorceress. Be careful, said the Tin Woodsman to the Scarecrow, who was leaning far over the side to look at the army below. You might fall.
It wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter, remarked the educated Wogglebug. He can't get broke so long as he is stuffed with money.
Didn't I ask you?
Began Tip in a reproachful voice. You did, said the Wogglebug promptly, and I beg your pardon. I will really try to restrain myself.
You'd better.
Declared the boy.
That is, if you wish to travel in our company.
Ah, couldn't bear to part with you now, murmured the insect, feeling so Tip let the subject drop. The army moved steadily on, but night had fallen before they came to the walls of the Emerald City. By the dim light of the new moon, however, Glinda's forces silently surrounded the city and pitched their tents of scarlet silk upon the green sward. The tent of the sorceress was larger than the others, and was composed of pure white silk, with scarlet banners flying above it. A tent was also pitched for the Scarecrow's party, and when these preparations had been made, with military precision and quickness, the army retired to rest. Great was the amazement of Queen Ginger next morning, when her soldiers came running to inform her of the vast army surrounding them. She had once climbed to a high tower of the royal palace, and saw banners waving in every direction, and the great white tent of Glinda standing directly before the gates.
We are surely lost,
cried Ginger in despair.
For how can our knitting needles avail against the long spears and terrible swords of our foes? The best thing we can do,
said one of the girls,
is to surrender as quickly as possible before we get hurt. Not so,
returned Ginger more bravely.
The enemy is still outside the walls, so we must try to gain time by engaging them in a parley. So, go you with a flag of truce to Glinda and ask her why she has dared to invade my dominion, and what are her demands.
So the girl passed through the gates, bearing a white flag to show she was on a mission of peace, and came to Glinda's tent.
Tell your queen, said Tell your queen,
said the sorceress to the girl.
that she must deliver up to me old Mombi to be my prisoner. If this is done, I will not attack her further.
Now, when this message was delivered to the queen, it filled her with dismay, for Mumby was her chief counselor, and Ginger was terribly afraid of the old hag. But she sent for Mumby and told her what Glinda had said.
I see trouble ahead for all of us,
muttered the old witch, after glancing into a magic mirror she carried in her pocket.
but we may even yet escape by deceiving this sorceress, clever as she thinks herself. Don't you think it will be safer for me to deliver you into her hands?
Asked Ginger nervously.
If you do, it will cost you the throne of the Emerald City,
answered the witch positively.
But if you will let me have my own way, I can save us both very easily. Then do as you please,
replied Ginger,
for it is so aristocratic to be a queen that I do not wish to be obliged to return home again to make beds and wash dishes for my mother.
So Mombi called Jellia Jam to her, and performed a certain magical rite with which she was familiar. As a result of the enchantment, Jellia took on the form and features of Mombi, while the old witch grew to resemble the girl, so closely that it seemed impossible anyone could guess the deception.
Now,
said old Mombi to the queen,
let your soldiers deliver up this girl to Glinda. She will think she has the real Mombi to her power, and so will return immediately to her own country in the south.
Therefore Jellia, hobbling along like an aged woman, was led from the city gates and taken before Glinda.
Here is the person you demanded, said one of the guards, and our queen now begs you will go away, as you promised, and leave us in peace. That I will surely do,
replied Glinda, much pleased.
If this is really the person she seems to be.
It certainly is. It is certainly old Mombi, said the guard, who believed she was speaking the truth. And then Ginger's soldiers returned within the city's gates. The sorceress quickly summoned the Scarecrow and his friends to her tent, and began to question the supposed Mombi about the lost girl Ozma. But Jellia knew nothing at all of this affair, and presently she grew so nervous under the questioning that she gave way and began to weep, to Glinda's great astonishment.
Here is some foolish trickery,
said the sorceress, her eyes flashing with anger.
This is not Mombi at all, but some other person who has made to resemble her. Tell me,
she demanded, turning to the trembling girl.
What is your name?
This Jellia dared not tell, having been threatened with death by the witch if she confessed the fraud. But Glinda, sweet and fair through she was, understood magic better than any other person in the land of Oz. So, by uttering a few potent words and making a peculiar gesture, she quickly transformed the girl into a proper shape, while at the same time old Mombi, far away in Ginger's palace, suddenly resumed her own crooked form and evil features.
Why, it's Jellia Jam,
cried the Scarecrow, recognizing in the girl one of his old friends.
It's our interpreter,
said the Pumpkinhead, smiling pleasantly. And Jellia was forced to tell of the trick Mombi had played, and she also begged Glinda's protection, which the sorceress readily granted. But Glinda was now really angry and sent word to Ginger that the fraud was discovered, and she must deliver up the real Mombi or suffer terrible consequences. Ginger was prepared for this message, for the witch well understood, when her natural form was thrust upon her, that Glinda had discovered her trickery. But the wicked old creature had already thought up a new deception, and had made Ginger promise to carry it out. So the queen said to Glinda's messenger,
Tell your mistress that I cannot find Mombi anywhere, but that Glinda is welcome to enter the city and search herself for the old woman. She may also bring her friends with her, if she likes, but if she does not find old Mombi by sundown, the sorceress must promise to go away peacefully and bother us no more.
Glinda agreed to these terms, well knowing that Mombi was somewhere within the city walls. So Ginger caused the gates to be thrown open, and Glinda marched in at the head of a company of soldiers, followed by the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodsman, and Jack Pumpkinhead rode astride the Sawhorse, and the educated, highly magnified Wogglebug sauntered behind in a dignified manner. Tip walked by the side of the sorceress, for Glinda had conceived a great liking for the boy. Of course, old Mombi had no intention of being found by Glinda, so while her enemies were marching up the street, the witch transformed herself into a red rose, growing upon a bush in the garden of the palace. It was a clever idea, and a trick Glinda did not suspect. So several precious hours were spent in a vain search for Mombi. As sundown approached, the sorceress realized she had been defeated by the superior cunning of the aged witch. So she gave the command to her people to march out of the city and back to their tents. The Scarecrow and his comrades happened to be searching in the garden of the palace just then, and they turned with disappointment to obey Glinda's command. But before they left the garden, the Tin Woodsman, who was fond of flowers, chanced to espy a big red rose growing upon a bush. So he plucked the flower and fastened it securely in the tin buttonhole of his tin bosom. As he did this, he fancied he heard a low moan proceed from the rose, but he paid no attention to the sound, and Mombi was thus carried out of the city and into Glinda's camp without anyone having a suspicion that they had succeeded in their quest. The transformation of old Mombi. The witch was at first frightened at finding herself captured by the enemy, but soon she decided that she was exactly as safe in the Tin Woodsman's buttonhole as growing upon the bush, for no one knew the rose and Mombi to be one, and now that she was without the gates of the city, her chances of escaping altogether from Glinda were much improved.
But there is no hurry, thought Mombi. I will wait a while and enjoy the humiliation of the sorceress when she finds I have outwitted her.
So throughout the night, the rose lay quietly on the woodsman's bosom, and in the morning, when Glinda summoned our friends to a consultation, Nick Chopper arrived, his pretty flower with him, to the white silk tent.
For some reason, said Glinda, we have failed to find the cunning old Mombi, so I fear our expectations will prove a failure, and for that I am sorry, because without our assistance, little Ozma will never be rescued and restored to her rightful position as Queen of the Emerald City.
Do not let us give up so easily, said the Pumpkinhead. Let us do something else.
Something else must really be done,
replied Glinda with a smile.
Yet I cannot understand how I have been defeated so easily by an old witch who knows far less of magic than I do myself.
While we are on the ground, I believe it would be wise for us to conquer the Emerald City for Princess Ozma and find the girl afterward, said the Scarecrow. And while the girl remains hidden, I will gladly rule in her place, for I understand the business of rulings much better than Ginger does. I promised not to attack Ginger, objected Glinda. Sup- Suppose you all return with me to my kingdom, or empire, rather, said the Tin Woodsman politely, including the entire party in a royal wave of his arm. It will give me great pleasure to entertain you in my castle, where there is room enough and to spare, and if any of you wish to be nickel-plated, my valet will do it free of all expense. While the woodsman was speaking, Glinda's eyes had been noting the rose in his buttonhole, and now she imagined she saw the big red leaves of the flower tremble slightly. This quickly aroused her suspicions, and in a moment more of the sorceress had decided that the seeming rose was nothing else than a transformation of old Mombi. At the same instant, Mombi knew she was discovered, and must quickly plan an escape. And as transformations were easy to her, she immediately took the form of a shadow, and glided along the wall of the tent toward the entrance, thinking thus to disappear. But Glinda had not only equal cunning, but far more experience than the witch, so the sorceress reached the opening of the tent before the shadow, and with a wave of her hand, closed the entrance so securely that Mombi could not find a crack big enough to creep through the scarecrow. To, find, to creep through. The Scarecrow and his friends were greatly surprised at Glinda's actions, for none of them had noted the shadow. The sorceress said to them, "Remain perfectly quiet, all of you, for the old witch is even now with us in this tent, and I hope to capture her." Those words so alarmed Mombi that she quickly transformed herself from a shadow to a black ant, in which shape she crawled along the ground, seeking a crack or crevice in which to hide her tiny body. Fortunately, the ground where the tent had been pitched, being just before the city gates, was hard and smooth, and while the ant still crawled about, Glinda discovered it, and ran quickly forward to effect its capture. But just as her hand was descending, the witch, now fairly frantic with fear, made her last transformation, and in the form of a huge griffin sprang through the wall of the tent, tearing the silk asunder in a rush, and in a moment had darted away with the speed of a rope. Glinda did not hesitate to follow. She sprang upon the back of the sawhorse and cried, "Now you shall prove that you have a right to be alive. Run, run, run." The sawhorse ran. Like a flash, he followed the griffin, his wooden legs moving so fast that they twinkled like the rays of a star. Before our friend could recover from their surprise, both the griffin and the sawhorse had dashed out of sight. "Come, come, let us follow," cried the Scarecrow. They ran to the place where the Grump was lying, and quickly tumbled aboard. "Fly!" commanded Tip eagerly. "Where to?" asked the Gump in its calm voice. "I don't know," returned Tip, who was very nervous at the delay. "But if you will mount into the air, I think we can discover which way Glinda has gone." "Very well," returned the Gump quietly, and it spread its great wings and mounted high into the air. Far away across the meadow, they could now see two tiny specks speeding one after the other, and they knew these specks must be the griffin and the sawhorse. So Tip called the Gump's attention to them, and bade the creature try to overtake the witch and the sorceress. But swift as was the Gump's sight, the pursued and pursuer moved more swiftly yet. and within a few moments were blotted out against the dim horizon. Let us continue to follow them, nevertheless, said the Scarecrow, for the land of Oz is of small extent, and sooner or later they must both come to a halt. Old Mombi had thought herself very wise to choose the form of a griffin, for its legs were exceedingly fleet, and its strength more enduring than that of other animals. But she had not reckoned on the tiring energy of the sawhorse, whose wooden limbs could run for days without slacking. Their speed, therefore, after an hour's hard running, the griffin's breath began to fail, and it panted and gasped painfully, and moved more slowly than before. Then it reached the edge of the desert and began racing across the deep sands. But its tired feet sank far into the sand, and in a few minutes the griffin fell forward, completely exhausted, and lay still upon the desert waste. Glinda came up a moment later, riding the still vigorous sawhorse, and having unwound a slender golden thread from her girdle, the sorceress threw it over the head of the panting and helpless griffin, and so destroyed the magical power of Mombi's transformation. For the animal, with one fierce shudder, disappeared from view, while in its place was discovered the form of the old witch, glaring savagely at the serene and beautiful face of the sorceress. Princess Ozma of Oz.
You are my prisoner, and it is useless for you to struggle any longer,
said Glinda in her soft, sweet voice.
Lie still a moment and rest yourself, and then I will carry you back to my tent. Why do you seek me?
Asked Mombi, still scarce able to speak plainly for lack of breath.
What have I done to you to be so persecuted? You have done nothing to me,
answered the gentle sorceress.
But I suspect you have been guilty of several wicked actions. And if I find it is true, and you have so abused your knowledge of magic, I intend to punish you severely. I defy you, croaked the old hag. You dare not harm me.
Just then the Gump flew up to them and alighted upon the desert sands beside Glinda. Our friends were delighted to find the Mombi had finally been captured, and after a hurried consultation, it was decided they should all return to the camp in the Gump. So the sawhorse was tossed aboard, and then Glinda, still holding an end of the golden thread that was around Mombi's neck, forced her prisoner to climb into the sofas the others now followed, and Tip gave the word to the Gump to return. The journey was made in safety, Mombi sitting in her place with a grim and sullen air, but the old hag was absolutely helpless, so long as the magical thread encircled her throat. The army hailed Glinda's return with loud cheers, and the party of friends soon gathered again in the royal tent, with which had been neatly repaired during their absence.
Now,
said the sorceress to Mombi,
I want you to tell us why the wonderful Wizard of Oz paid you 3 visits, and what became of the child, Ozma, which so curiously disappeared.
The witch looked at Glinda defiantly, but said not a word.
Answer me,
cried the sorceress, but still Mombi remained silent.
Perhaps she doesn't know,
remarked Jack.
I beg you to keep quiet,
said Tip.
You might spoil everything with your foolishness.
Very well, dear father, returned the Pumpkinhead meekly. How glad I am to be a Wogglebug, murmured the highly magnified insect softly. No one can expect wisdom to flow from a pumpkin. Well, said the Scarecrow, what shall we do to make Mombi speak? Unless she tells us what we wish to know, her capture will do us no good at all. Suppose we try kindness, suggested the Tin Woodsman. I've heard that anyone can be conquered with kindness. no matter how ugly they may be. At this the witch turned to glare upon him, so horribly that the Tin Woodsman shrank back abashed. Glinda had been carefully considering what to do, and now she turned to Mombi and said,
You will gain nothing, I assure you, by thus defying us, for I am determined to learn the truth about the girl Ozma, and unless you tell me all that you know, I will certainly put you to death.
Oh, oh no, don't do that, exclaimed the Tin Woodsman. It would be an awful thing to kill anyone, even old Mombi.
But it is merely a threat,
Returned Glinda.
I shall not put Mombi to death, because she will prefer to tell me the truth.
Oh, I see, said the Tin Man, much relieved. Suppose I tell you all that you wish to know, said Mombi, speaking so suddenly that she startled them all. What will you do with me then?
In that case, replied Glinda, I shall merely ask you to drink a powerful draught, which will cause you to forget all the magic you have ever learned.
Then I would become a helpless old woman.
But you would be alive,
suggested the But you would be alive, suggested the Pumpkinhead, consolingly. Do try to keep silent, said Tip nervously. I'll try, responded Jack. But you will admit that it's a good thing to be alive. Especially if one happens to be thoroughly educated, added the Wogglebug, nodding approval.
You may make your choice,
Glinda said to old Mombi,
between death if you remain silent and the loss of your magical powers. If you tell me the truth, but I think you will prefer to live.
Mombi cast an uneasy glance at the sorceress and saw that she was in earnest, and not to be trifled with, so she replied slowly, I will answer your questions.
That is what I expected,
said Glinda pleasantly.
You have chosen wisely, I assure you.
She then motioned to one of the captains, who brought her a beautiful golden casket. From this, the sorceress drew an immense white pearl attached to a slender chain, which she placed around her neck in such a way that the pearl rested upon her bosom, directly over her heart.
Now,
she said,
I will ask my first question. What did the wizard pay you? Why did the wizard pay you 3 visits?
Because I would not come to him, answered Mombi.
That is no answer,
said Glinda sternly.
Tell me the truth.
Well, returned Mombi, with downcast eyes, he visited me to learn the way I make tea biscuits.
Look up,
commanded the sorceress. Mombi obeyed.
What is the color of my pearl?
demanded Glinda. Why, it is black, replied the old witch in a tone of wonder.
Then you have told me a falsehood,
cried Glinda angrily.
Only when the truth is spoken will my magic pearl remain a pure white in color.
Mombi now saw how useless it was to try to deceive the sorceress, so she said, meanwhile scowlingly at her defeat, The wizard brought to me the girl Ozma, who was then no more than a baby, and begged me to conceal the child.
That is what I thought,
declared Glinda calmly.
What did he give you for thus saving him?
He taught me all the magical tricks he knew. Some were good tricks, and some were only frauds, but I have remained faithful to my promise.
What did you do with the girl?
asked Glinda. At this question everyone bent forward and listened eagerly for the reply. I enchanted her, answered Mombi. In what way? I transformed her into into what? Demanded Glinda as the witch hesitated. Into a boy, said Mombi in a low tone. A boy? Echoed every voice. And then, because they knew that this old woman had reared Tip from childhood, all eyes returned to where the boy stood. Yes, said the old witch, nodding her head. That is the Princess Ozma, the child brought to me by the wizard, who stole her father's throne. This is the rightful ruler of the Emerald City. And she pointed her long, bony finger straight at the boy. I, cried Tip in amazement. Why, I'm no Princess Ozma. I'm not even a girl. Glinda smiled, and going to Tip, she took his small brown hand within her dainty one. You are not a girl just now, said she gently, because Mombi transformed you into a boy. But you were born a girl, and also a princess, so you must resume your proper form, that you may become the Queen of the Emerald City. Oh, let Ginger be the queen, exclaimed Tip, ready to cry. I want to stay a boy and travel with the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodsman and the Wogglebug and Jack. Yes, and my friend, the Sawhorse and the Gump. I don't want to be a girl. Never mind, old chap, said the Tin Woodsman, soothing. It don't hurt to be a girl, I'm told, and we all will all remain your faithful friends, just the same. And to be honest with you, I've always considered girls nicer than boys. They're just as nice anyway, added the Scarecrow, patting Tip affectionately upon the head. And they are all equally good students, proclaimed the Wogglebug. I should like to become your tutor when you are transformed into a girl. Again. But see here, said Jack Pumpkinhead with a gasp. If you become a girl, you can't be my dear father any more. No, answered Tip, laughing in spite of his anxiety. And I shall not be sorry to escape the relationship. Then he added hesitatingly, as he turned to Glinda, I might try it for a while, just to see how it seems, but if I don't like being a girl, you must promise to change me into a boy again. Really, said the sorceress, that is beyond my magic. I never did. I never deal in transformations, for they are not honest, and no respectable sorceress likes to make things appear to be what they are not. Only unscrupulous witches use the art, and therefore I must ask Mombi to effect your release from her charm and restore you to your proper form. It will be the last opportunity she will have to practice magic. Now the truth about Princess Ozma had been discovered. Mombi did not care what became of Tip, but she feared Glinda's anger, and the boy generously promised to provide for Mombi in her old age if he became the ruler of the Emerald City. So the witch consented to effect the transformations and preparations for the event were at once made. Glinda ordered her own royal couch to be placed in the center of the tent. It was piled high with cushions covered with rose-colored silk, and from a golden railing above hung many folds of pink gossamer, completely concealing the interior of the couch. The first act of the witch was to make the boy drink a potion, which quickly sent him into a deep and dreamless sleep. Then the Tin Woodsman and the Wogglebug bore him gently to the couch, placed him upon the soft cushions, and drew the gossamer hangings to shut him from all earthly view. The witch squatted upon the ground and kindled a tiny fire of dried herbs, which she drew from her bosom. When the blaze shot up and burned clearly, old Mombi scattered a handful of magical powders over the fire, which straightway gave off a rich violet vapor, filling all the tent with its fragrance, and forcing the sawhorse to sneeze, although he had been warned to keep quiet. Then, while the others watched her curiously, the hag chanted a rhythmical verse in words which no one understood, and bent her lean body several times, back and forth over the fire. And now the incantation seemed complete, for the witch stood upright and cried the one word Yauna in a loud voice. The vapor floated away, the atmosphere became clear again, a whiff of fresh air filled the tent, and the pink curtains of the couch trembled slightly, as if stirred from within. Glinda walked to the canopy and parted the silken hangings. Then she bent over the cushions, reached out her hand, and from the couch arose the form of a young girl. Fresh and beautiful as a May morning, her eyes sparkled as two diamonds, and her lips were tinted like a tourmaline. All adown her back floated tresses of ruddy gold, with a slender jeweled circlet confining them at the brow. Her robes of silken gauze floated around her like a cloud, and dainty satin slippers shod her feet. And this exquisite vision, Tip's old comrades stared in wonder for the space of a full minute, and then every head bent low in honest admiration of the lovely Princess Ozma. The girl herself cast one look into Glinda's bright face, which glowed with pleasure and satisfaction, and then turned upon the others. Speaking the words with sweet diffidence, she said,
I hope none of you will care less for me than you did before. I'm just the same Tip, you know,
Only you're different, said the Pumpkinhead, and everyone thought it was the wisest speech he had ever made. The Riches of Content. When the wonderful tidings reached the ears of Queen Ginger, how Mombi the Witch had been captured, how she had confessed her crime to Glinda, and how the long-lost Princess Ozma, had been discovered in no less a personage than the boy Tip, she wept real tears of grief and despair. To think, she moaned, that after having ruled as queen and lived in a palace, I must go back to scrubbing floors and churning butter again. It is too horrible to think of. I will never consent. So when her soldiers, who spent most of their time making fudge in the palace kitchens, compelled Ginger to resist, she listened to their foolish prattle and sent a sharp defiance to Glinda, the Good, and the Princess Ozma. The result was a declaration of war, and the very next day Glinda marched upon the Emerald City, with pennants now flying and bands playing, and a forest of shining spears, sparkling bright beneath the sun's rays. But when it came to the walls, this brave assembly made a sudden halt, for Ginger had closed and barred every gateway, and the walls of the Emerald City were built high and thick, with many blocks of green marble. Finding her advance this baffled, Glinda bent her brows in deep thought, while the Wogglebug said, in his most positive tone, We must lay siege to the city and starve it into submission. It is the only thing we can do. Not so, answered the Scarecrow. We still have the Gump, and the Gump can still fly. The sorceress turned quickly at this speech, and her face now wore a bright smile.
You are right, she exclaimed, and certainly have reason to be proud of your brains. Let us go to the Gump at once.
So they passed through the ranks of the army until they came to the palace, to the place near the Scarecrow's tent, where the Gump lay. Glinda and Princess Ozma mounted first, and sat upon the sofas. Then the Scarecrow and his friends climbed aboard, and still there was room for a captain, and 3 soldiers, which Glinda considered sufficient for a guard. Now, at a word from the princess, the strange thing they had called the Gump flopped its palm leaf wings, rose into the air, carrying the party of adventurers high above the walls. They hovered over the palace and soon perceived Ginger reclining in a hammock in the courtyard, where she was comfortable, reading a novel with a green cover and eating green chocolates, confident that the walls would protect her from her enemies. Obeying a quick command, the Gump alighted safety in this very courtyard, and before Ginger had time to do more than scream, the captain and three soldiers leaped out and made the former queen a prisoner, locking strange chains upon both her wrists. That act really ended the war, for the army of revolts submitted as soon as they knew Ginger to be a captive, and the captain marched in safety through the streets and up to the gates of the city, which she knew wide open. Then the bands played their most stirring music while Glinda's army marched into the city, and heralds proclaimed the conquest of the audacious Ginger and the accession of the beautiful Princess Ozma to the throne of her royal ancestors. At once the men of the Emerald City cast off their aprons, and it is said that the women were so tired eating of their husbands' cooking that they all hailed the conquest of Ginger with joy. Certain it is that, rushing one and all to the kitchens of their houses, the good wives prepared so delicious a feast for the weary men that harmony was immediately restored in every family. Ozma's first act was to oblige the army of revolt to return to her every emerald or other gem stolen from the public streets and buildings, and so great was the number of precious stones picked from their setting by these vain girls, every one of the royal jewelers worked steadily for more than a month to replace them in their settings. Meanwhile, the army of revolt was disbanded and the girls sent home to their mothers. On promise of good behavior, Ginger was likewise released. Ozma made the loveliest queen the Emerald City had ever known, and although she was so young and inexperienced, she ruled her people with wisdom and justice. While Glinda gave her good advice on all occasions, and the Wogglebug, who was appointed to the important post of public educator, was quite helpful to Ozma when her royal duties grew perplexing. The girl, in her gratitude to the Gump for its services, offered the creature any reward it might name.
Then,
Replied the Gump,
please take me to pieces. I do not wish to be brought to life, and I am greatly ashamed of my conglomerate personage. Once I was a monarch of the forest, as my antlers fully prove, but now in my present upholstered condition of servitude I am compelled to fly through the air, my legs being of no use to me whatever, therefore I beg to be dispersed.
So Ozma ordered the Gump taken apart. The antlered head was again hung over the mantelpiece in the hall, and the sofas were untied and placed in the reception parlors. The broom tail resumed its accustomed duties in the kitchen, and finally the Scarecrow replaced all the clotheslines and ropes on the pegs from which he had taken them on the eventful day when the thing was constructed. You might think that was the end of the Gump, and so it was, as a flying machine. But the head over the mantelpiece continued to talk whenever it took a notion to do so, and it frequently startled, with its abrupt questions, the people who waited in the hall for an audience with the Queen. The sawhorse, being Ozma's personal property, was tenderly cared for, and often she rode the strange creature along the streets of the Emerald City. She had its wooden legs shod with gold to keep them from wearing out, and the tinkle of these golden shoes upon the pavement always filled the Queen's subjects with awe as they thought upon this creature of her magical powers. The wonderful wizard was never so wonderful as Queen Ozma, the people said to one another in whispers, for he claimed to do many things he could not do, whereas our new queen does many things no one would ever expect her to accomplish. Jack Pumpkinhead remained with Ozma to the end of his days, and he did not spoil as soon as he had feared, although he had always remained as stupid as ever. The Wogglebug tried to teach him several arts and sciences, but Jack was so poor a student that any attempt to educate him was soon abandoned. After Glinda's army had marched home, marched back home, and peace was restored to the Emerald City, the Tin Woodsman announced his intention to return to his own kingdom of the Winkies. "It isn't a very bright kingdom," said he to Ozma, "but for that very reason, it is easier to rule, and I have called myself an emperor because I am an absolute monarch, and no one interferes in any way with my conduct of public or personal affairs. When I get home, I shall have a new coat of nickel plate, for I have become somewhat married and scratched lately, and that I shall be glad to have you pay me a visit." "Thank you," replied Ozma. "Some day I may accept the invitation, but what is it to become of the Scarecrow?" "I shall return with my friend the Tin Woodsman," said the stuffed one seriously. "We have decided never to be parted in the future." "And I have made the Scarecrow my royal treasure," exclaimed the Tin Woodsman, "for it has occurred to me that it is a very good thing to have a royal's treasure who is made of money. What do you think?" "I think," said the little queen, smiling, "that your friend must be the richest man in all the world." "I am," returned the Scarecrow, "but not on account of my money, for I consider brains far superior to money in every way. You may have noticed that if one has money without brains, he cannot use it to advantage. But if one has brains without money, they will enable him to live comfortably to the end of his days." "At the same time," declared the Tin Woodsman, "you must acknowledge that a good heart is a thing that brains cannot create, and that money cannot buy. Perhaps, after all, it is I who am the richest man in all the world." "You are both rich, my friends," said Ozma gently, "and your riches are the only rich and your riches are the only riches worth having, the riches of content." The end. All right. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a great night. Stay safe, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow with, I guess we'll start on the next book in the Wizard of Oz series. That at least the next one that Junior Classic Books has. In the meantime, let's go ahead and find someone to raid off to. All right, let's go ahead and raid off to Momster. Please give Momster some love and support, and I'll see you all on tomorrow. Later.